YouTube warbles on a lot here. I think we might have to have a little bit of a discussion about ISIL and their recruiting methods and the Western governments and their responses to them.
Urges supporters to kill any citizen from the coalition of countries being formed to fight in Iraq or Syria. But both the federal government and the Labor Party say they're committed to any necessary action to deal with the IS extremists. Political correspondent Louise Yaxley reports.
This is just these crazy people trying to talk things up and talk themselves up.
Scott Morrison doesn't want to give the Islamic State movement any respect or standing, and nor does Bill Shorten.
When it comes to national security and defeating those crazy, ranting people who we were talking about earlier, everyone is on the same page.
So it's a united front from the government and opposition, with Mr Morrison telling Australians the situation's under control.
The government has these matters in hand. The authorities are responding appropriately. The Prime Minister is leading the government strongly in this area, and along with his ministers, and we are focused on the job that we have before us, which is to protect the Australian people. So this is nothing new. Australia has always been the target of extremists and terrorists for who we are, and Australians should never be intimidated by that.
And Mr Shorten's told Fairfax Radio he trusts the authorities to tackle the threat.
It is shocking. These people are dangerous idiots who would seek to bring their particular brand of craziness to Australia. The only thing is, though, that for these people, their bark is bigger than their bite when it comes to Australia. With our police and security agencies, and I'm privileged in my position to be able to get briefings periodically from the security agencies. Our security agencies are pretty formidable. I'd back our guys against their guys.
When it comes to bringing in new anti-terrorism laws, Mr Shorten says the opposition will work with the government.
They should feel some degree of confidence that when it comes to national security and defeating those crazy, ranting people who we were talking about earlier, everyone is on the same page. This will be a constructive process. This is not the usual day at the parliamentary office where there's arguments about the economy or the budget. This national security debate is above that.
But Green Senator Scott Ludlam says the threat doesn't mean new laws should just be waved through.
The Greens agree that the situation is very serious here at home and overseas. We've just deployed back into a war in Iraq. People are obviously very, very concerned about the statements overnight, in which Australia is named, I think, 3 times, that these threats are real. And I think the Australian government should do the Australian Parliament justice in at least being clear about what it is that we're proposed to pass, because I think what we're seeing here is effectively overreach and not something that will make the Australian people any safer.
Senator Ludlam warns that more military action in Iraq is not the answer.
I've got very significant concerns about the whole premise that we can make people safer by pouring petrol on the fire that we helped start in Iraq. I think any escalation of violence in that region, we would hope that we would have learned from some of the lessons of the past. So we don't support ground troops going in, but let's be very serious. The SAS are ground troops. They are not people that you hold back at headquarters writing reports. So the commitment that this would be strictly humanitarian and the commitment that there would be no boots on the ground didn't last a fortnight.
And Labor backbencher Melissa Park has told Parliament she has major concerns. She says recent beheadings of Westerners have stoked a desire for justice in a way that other atrocities have not, but she warns there's a need for a calm and rational response.
Given the disastrous consequences of previous military interventions, as well as the continually evolving and incredibly complex situation in the Middle East, it has perhaps never been more important to curb that natural instinct for retaliation and the use of hard power and consider the root causes.
And Ms Park says expert opinions should be heeded.
The authoritative and internationally respected commentator Rachel Sharby made the following observations just this week. It should be obvious by now that if such bombing campaigns have an effect, it is to make things much worse. What Western leaders portray as valiant efforts to rid the world of evil forces such as ISIL just don't play the same way in the region. In Iraq, for instance, Western military intervention is viewed as support for the authoritarian, sectarian and West-approved leadership, whose persecution and airstrikes are so bad that many Sunnis are prepared to put up with ISIL for now as preferable. Western military intervention thus gives ISIL its recruitment fuel of choice, a war with self-interested external enemy around which to galvanise support.
But despite the warnings, Australia is moving closer to joining the military action. The Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, is in New York ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on Iraq and Syria this week.
Indeed, it's an open debate, so all countries...
And they're doing everything they can to make it all get worse. So let's have a look at some evidence-based policy instead. New Scientist magazine 10 days ago. Page 8. Titled Lifting the Black Mask, the science behind what makes people become jihadi fighters. It's a question being asked around the world. How can you stem the flow of foreign jihadis making their way to Syria and Iraq? As New Scientist went to press, politicians on both sides of the Atlantic were finalising their game plans to tackle the rise of Sunni jihadist group Islamic State, but the issue of homegrown fighters won't be far from their minds. The answers will be based partly on research that a handful of counter-terrorism scientists have carried out since 9/11. But piecing together the mindset of a jihadi hasn't been easy because of a scarcity of field data, which means that foreign policy and media coverage is underpinned by speculation rather than hard data. In recent months, several researchers have called on the US government to allow academics access to intelligence data, such as intercepted communications and transcripts of interviews, to help them understand how fighters become radicalised. Despite the shortage of first-hand material, some things seem clear. For instance, the idea that hundreds of British and other European Muslims fighting for IS were brainwashed or coerced by jihadist recruiters into joining is almost certainly wrong. Those who study terrorist behaviour claim that the vast majority of fighters originating in the West are radicalised at home, influenced largely by their own circle of friends. Quote, "The brainwashing theory is baloney," says Scott Atran of France's National Centre for Scientific Research in Paris. "This is more about young people hooking up with their friends and going on a glorious mission," unquote. Evidence collected by the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation, ICSR, close bracket, at King's College London, supports this view. The ICSR has been following about 450 foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq, communicating with dozens of them through social media tools such as Facebook and WhatsApp, and conducting interviews on the Syrian border. It estimates that 80 to 85% of them mobilised with their peer group. Quote, "The majority go as part of clusters," unquote, says the ICSR's director Peter Newman. This explains why a disproportionate number of recent British jihadis have come from the same places, such as Portsmouth and Cardiff. A couple of them might go first, they stay in touch with each other, and one by one they pull their friends out there," unquote. None of the jihadis interviewed by his group were recruited in the sense of someone reaching out proactively to manipulate them, he says. Quote, "That doesn't happen. No one has been indoctrinated," unquote. This path to radicalisation is in line with what many studies on terrorist behaviour in the past decade have suggested, and is a long way from the often peddled idea of indoctrination. So why do such myths persist? Mark Sageman, a forensic psychiatrist and consultant to various US government agencies, thinks they allow politicians and commentators to ignore wider causes of radicalisation, such as political injustice, which may be unpalatable to Western governments. Quote, "You get politicians saying that IS is a bunch of psychopaths, which is not helpful," unquote. Of course, it makes little sense to study how terrorists are radicalised without looking at the political context. Quote, "It won't do to just look at the militants and assume that if we know enough about them, we're going to understand this," unquote, says Mark McCauley, a psychologist at the Solomon Axe Centre for Study of Ethno-Political Conflict in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. We're not. We need databases on how governments respond to terrorism as much as we need databases on what terrorists do. Sageman agrees. Quote, "This is political violence, and the number one assumption should be that it's about politics. That means broadening the focus of terrorism research to political science, economics, sociology, social psychology, and anthropology. The need for a broader appreciation of the factors driving Islamist extremism is underlined by an as yet unpublished study conducted by Macaulay's team. This shows widespread sympathy among Muslims in the US for Syria's repressed Sunni Muslims. About half those questions said they wouldn't condemn anyone who joined the fight against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, or that doing so was morally justified. They would not condemn them, or they said it was morally justified. Macaulay expects results would be similar in the UK. The poll was conducted in July, so it isn't known how the beheadings conducted by IS since then have affected the level of support. Only a tiny minority of those who sympathise with the jihadi cause choose to fight for it. For those who do, there are many paths by which they can become radicalised. Quote, "There is no one storyline," unquote, says Macaulay. But most researchers agree that, aside from the influence of peers, the following factors are important. A personal grievance, such as a crisis of identity that opens them up to a new religious or political ideology. A sense that their cultural in-group is being persecuted. Moral outrage at injustice, brackets, discrimination against a relative, for example, close brackets. And access to a politically active network. While there is evidence that some have been influenced by hardline clerics, this is rarely the principal driver. Knowing this, is it possible to steer those on the path to radicalisation away from that path? The UK government's Channel program aims to identify vulnerable people and introduce them to a suitable role model, for example, or help them with their career or relationships. This approach is unlikely to turn hardened militants, says Newman, but the Home Office says Channel has helped several hundred of the 2,000 people referred to it since 2012. It should be easier to develop similar programs that could de-radicalise returning fighters if intelligence data gets released, exposing the motivations and experiences of frontline jihadis. The difficulty is not lack of ideas, but lack of field knowledge, says Atran. Nobody really knows what's going on with IS. Well, so far, based on this, everything that Tony Abbott's government has done has been almost tailor-made to cause an increase in anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Islamic sentiment in the Australian population. And it's very hard to expect the downstream consequences of stirring up a whole bunch of anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic, anti-Arab sentiment in the population is going to do anything at all to make the disaffected, malcontented, angry adolescent or angry young men in the Muslim community feel like they're part of Australia. They're not going to feel like they're Team Australia if they get racially profiled because somebody in the Middle East has put out a fatwa calling for disaffected Muslims worldwide to target Americans, Europeans, he called them hated French, Australians, Canadians, was particularly singled out as being people who are annoying them. And therefore there's going to be a crackdown, and the crackdown will create a backlash, and the backlash is entirely likely to play into the hands of the right-wing control freak side of politics and the right-wing control freak side of the security industry. So Tony Abbott's going to New York to talk to the Security Council about the terrible problems of terrorism. In the last 10 years, 85 Australians have died from the effects of extreme weather events. No Australians have died due to terrorism in Australia, and Tony Abbott's not going to go to the United Nations Congress on global warming and climate change. Australia has committed $500 million to running around the sandpit in Iraq and Syria and stirring up the shit, but we only offered $7.5 million to Médecins Sans Frontières to play with Ebola in Africa, and that offer was rejected. And now we have an Ebola patient in Perth, apparently, somebody giving off all the signs and symptoms of Ebola. As they say, pride goeth before a fall, and the mills of God may grind exceedingly slowly, but they do grind exceedingly fine. Tony Abbott will cop the karmic feedback for his foolishness on the cosmic scoreboard. It's a pity he's not more interested in green energy, because he's sowing the wind. We might be able to see him try to reap the whirlwind, eh? Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.